zochitika ndi madaphiri lolemba mpaka lachisanu pa nthawi ya 7 koloko kufikira 8 koloko madzulo pa Channel Africa.
Stay ahead with Africa in Business, where Tami Ngubeni unpacks your go-to source for Africa's economic trends and development.
We go to Nigeria now, where communication experts say the underappreciation of diplomatic culture within Africa is costing the continent lost investments, broken partnerships, and weakened international relevance. This was said over the weekend at the inaugural Diplomacy and Corporate Communications Conference, which is hosted at the American Corner in the University of Port Harcourt, Nigeria. The communicators met to review diplomatic communications in Nigeria and the rest of the continent and the impact that they are having on economic and investment opportunities. Joining us to unpack this further is the convener of the Diplomacy and Corporate Communications Conference, John Best UCHE. A very good afternoon to you, sir. Welcome to Africa in Business.
A very good afternoon to you, SABC.
So when we talk about diplomatic culture, what exactly are we making reference to?
Okay, so talking about diplomatic culture, we are actually making reference to the ability of citizens of a particular locale to appreciate or to, embrace, ways of relating better with others. All right, the relationship, being able to relate with others, in a more appreciable and perfect way that would encourage development in all ramifications, especially as it concerns, national development of that particular, group of people. So that's it.
And this Diplomacy and Corporate Communications Conference, how did that come about? It's quite an interesting concept.
Okay, so the idea, is we came up with that first with the objective of, building diplomatic leaders. All right, we came up with that with the main objective of building diplomatic leaders through, knowledge, skills, and then multilateral engagement. And what that means is that, we've noticed that there is a lot of gaps, all right, in diplomacy. And it's not as if students are not being taught. It's not as if citizens of, Nigeria, for me, being a Nigerian, and or citizens of South Africa, it's not as if they're not being taught, the courses around diplomacy, international relations, international diplomacy, and all of that in school. No, they are being taught, but we lack the practicality of these courses. That is, you're learning something, but you do not know how these things are being applied. You do not know this thing in real sense. All right. So we came up with the idea of Diplomacy and Corporate Communications Conference to enlighten these students and, of course, professionals, some of them that are already in diplomacy spaces and all that, to also, reiterate the importance of diplomacy in their everyday conversation. And, of course, that will result or that lead to national development. Of course, you know that the UN commemorates World or International Day of Multilateralism and Diplomacy for Peace every April 2024, all right? Every April 24 is commemorated as International Day of Multilateralism and Diplomacy for Peace. And the idea is to, let's talk about the theme this year, which talks about uniting for peaceful and sustainable future. We cannot unite, we cannot have a peaceful, future, all right, sustainable future, when we do not have a perfect knowledge of how to, it actually starts with to be diplomatic. All right. How are we relating with people? The way you relate with people determines whether or not, one can qualify you as somebody who is, peaceful, or who is diplomatic enough to actually bring about a peaceful coexistence. So the idea of the corporate communications or diplomacy and corporate communications conference is to actually, let those that are already studying diplomacy as a course, those that have actually studied it and they're out, They're even practicing.
And
They have
and
forgotten
who and
the
who
job
has
they're
been
actually called to do.
and who has been in attendance? Who attended the conference?
Okay, so we had students of diplomacy and corporate students of diplomacy, international relations, right? Those in the communication space, and of course, professionals. We had professionals. We had professionals. We had policymakers, like our speakers. Most of our speakers, or a lot of them, they are people already in the space of development space, and they have so much knowledge about diplomacy. All right. I don't know if you know about Ebenezer Wikina. All right. He is a policy shaper. He's a policy shaper, actually the founder of Policy Shapers. All right. Then our keynote speaker is also Chukuma Ifrem Okenwa. He is a diplomat himself. He has engaged in multilateral engagement. He has had multilateral engagements, a number of times, and he made a perfect, fit for to be our keynote speaker, and he was. Of course, Dr. Patrick Uduma, also a global leader, was there as our keynote speaker. Then we had panel session where our panelists were given the chance to, or students or participants were given a chance to ask questions as it concerns how to start a career in diplomacy, and also find their path in that same space and all of that. All right, we had simulation. The major part of that session, of that conference, was a simulation session. The major part of it, because we didn't want to do a conventional conference, like, okay, you just come listen to the keynote speakers. Okay, probably you ask questions, in the panels during the panel session, and that's it. No, we come up with the simulation session where our delegates, we had delegates, address issues, real life issues. That is where the practicality of diplomacy is actually, or was actually found. That was where the students or participants actually got to learn diplomacy practically.
And how it manifests itself. Now, one of the things that was raised at the conference is our failure, as far as the African continent is concerned, in diplomatic communications, and how that is costing the continent lost investments, broken partnerships, as well as weakened international relevance. What are some of the examples where we were found wanting?
All right, so this is it. I'm going to say this very briefly, and that is, I said something earlier, citing the theme for this year's International Day of Multilateralism and Diplomacy for Peace, which is actually that uniting. The theme is uniting for a peaceful and sustainable future. So, imagine a situation. All right, imagine a nation that is experiencing conflict, that is experiencing war, that is having issues, serious conflicts. Imagine that nation. How would an investor feel coming into that city, coming into that nation, coming into that country, or into that state to pitch his tent to say, I want to invest my resources in these in this country? Is that ever going to happen? Will the investor ever feel safe doing that? No. And I think that answers your question. Okay, let's cite an instance. All right, let's cite an instance between, okay, let me not go into that. I don't want to mention some of those.
Yes, and actually our time is going to run up in just a moment, but I really do, before it runs out, want to ask you, out of the 54 African countries, which ones would you say were the top three as the worst communicators on the international stage?
Okay, so for now, I would rather appreciate to speak from the side of those that are at least, all right, doing their bit in that regard. All right, at least I see just recently. My call here is not an absolute, is not to say that these African countries do not have all of these things in place, but there is no focus. There is no much attention, given to those institutions. Say, for instance, we have here in the country, Nigeria, we have a Center for Diplomatic Studies, and an institute, right? We have a Center for Diplomatic Studies where students are supposed to come learn, not necessarily a conventional setting and all of that. But how much attention is given to that center for students, for people, not students of, is it not being run like the conventional university where they go to study, international relations, diplomacy, and all of that. Okay, so the idea is for these countries to give more attention to the institutes or the training centers, the facilities they've got in place. All right, they've got all of these things in place. I believe, also that Nigeria is not too bad in that regard, but there is still need for the country to do more and do better in areas of branding, and of course, making it to look better on the global space.
And I think issues of consistency there are also quite important, and positioning of various countries on the international stage, but also perhaps even within ourselves as the African continent. But we're going to have to leave it there this afternoon. John Best UCHE, we thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so very much for having me. Thank you so very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. That's John Best UCHE. He is the convener of the Diplomacy and Corporate Communications Conference, which took place in Nigeria this past weekend. It's gone exactly 4:30 p.m. Central African time. Let's head over to Buntle Headbush with the latest financial indicators.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.